Well, good afternoon again, everybody. It's nice to see so many people are still here. What a wonderful day it's been. Let me just introduce Brenda McCormick, who's traveling. Can you wave, Brenda? Who's traveling here with me and pretty well gets me on the road and reminds me where I am and who I'm speaking to. So Pat, I know, is doing an interview just now at the moment, but I'd like to say to all of you how delighted I am to be having this invitation to be with you, and how much I admire the work that you're doing here, and how excited I've been to participate in the whole day. And starting, you know, with Pat was wonderful, and then going on and hearing David Howe was very exciting, and then we heard, it's also reinforcing, and you know, just the idea that we're all here talking about empathy. And you know, the timing is right when many people from many different places are saying the same thing. They might have a harmony to put on it, but we're all really talking about the same thing. So it was so reassuring to hear your wonderful message. And of course, I'm going to kidnap Catherine because she is so great for moving public policy. So I thought that was amazing. And then to hear Kira Beth and her wonderful message of difference. And you wouldn't believe how similar we are, except I'm an old lady and I've been at this forever, and look at you, 17 years of age. So really the premise of Roots of Empathy is that our difference is our strength, and our shared humanity is our emotions. So you'll hear a little bit more about how I agree very much with you. Great minds think alike, hey? So that was inspiring. And Aisling and the angels in Wellies, I mean, really, what a wonderful denouncement of bureaucracy. I thought, you know, we have an organization that I keep trying to keep small. So for example, in Ireland, we work directly through Bernardo's. They do all the heavy lifting. How many instructors are here today? I was told there were some. Hi, back there. Hello, hello. Great. But we try to keep a small footprint. You try to go with local wisdom, not reinvent the wheel and not set up rent in an office if you don't have to. But in our office in Toronto, we have 30 people. So we try very hard not to be bureaucratic, and the more people you have, the more rules you have, but we rail against it every day. So I'm right there with Aisling, and you know, I'd like to talk to her. She's gone, I think, for the day. Oh, there you are, hiding up in the middle. You thought you were anonymous. I just have to tell you about Fukushima. In Japan, when they had the incredible earthquake and then the wave, it was the youth like you who were the first ones who got in there and did something. And I happened to be in Tokyo and Osaka just not that long afterwards. And they brought all the youth in who were the first responders. And they brought them in to Tokyo to speak with me to explain how they were doing what they were doing. And I can tell you, we know our society is in a good place when our young people have a sense of agency. And very often it's the bureaucracy which prevents them from having a sense of personal efficacy. And when they have it on their own, we know good. You know, we're definitely on a good trajectory, knowing that. So, and then I just had a wonderful session with Bernardo's and hearing about restorative justice programs and the whole range of family and community and individual child, the way the programs fan out and meet the real needs of children and families across Ireland, and that was lovely to hear. Thank you for that. So I guess, why do we need Roots of Empathy? I should maybe start with that. I wish we didn't need Roots of Empathy, but my feeling is that empathy is at the core of our humanity. And if we want to be sure that for the generations to come, our humankind will be in good shape, that we won't become violent and greedy and inward-looking, we better be doing something about developing empathy in childhood. I guess I came at it from the perspective of initially being a kindergarten teacher, believing that if you worked with the youngest children, you had the best chance of making a deep impact. And that took me about 3 days to realize it wasn't about me. It was about the family. So I didn't stay particularly long teaching kindergarten. I have a profound respect for education and what happens. My respect is even deeper for the family. I think the two institutions that move the universe are the home and education. In developed countries, children are educated. They go to some sort of schooling and they spend an incredible amount of time there. So we better make sure we shore up both of those two institutions. So when I taught, I realized that it was quite inequitable that some of the children were coming to school really not ready to participate in any of the learning through nobody's fault, and that some were particularly successful. And I really believe that schools can have an amazing impact on positive outcomes, not just for children, but for society. And I think very often they're attacked by society. And I think the marriage of the home and school is probably one of the most important unions that we both respect and understand one another. So what I did was I started up, you mentioned it in my introduction, the parenting and family literacy centers in schools, a place for families to come with their little children. Whoever actually was taking care of little children, could be informal child care at home, grandparent care, whatever, but whoever had the babies from infancy to school age. And the idea was to support them in their parenting so that they could do the best job possible, not to tell them what was wrong with them. And this is back in 1981. I'm going on 100, I think. But the idea was, in those days, social work, and I also studied some social work as well as education. Social work was very prescriptive, and great lists would be made of all the clients' deficits. And our approach was very different. We would say, how can we help you? So you did a lot of the bread and butter work and got all the kinds of things out of the way, so that you could then get to the parenting. And rather than preaching or teaching, it was coaching, and it was playing. So simple things like, one of my goals was that every parent should have a friend. It's very simple, just a friend. And we were in the most depressed and violent areas, with the highest teenage pregnancy, the highest level of imprisonment, and the highest school dropout rate. So we only chose the most desperate schools to offer this innovation. And I have to say, as teachers, probably we learned as much about the community as the community learned about how to demystify school. And it was really a brilliant marriage. And those little children who were all entering school in the lowest 10th percentile, they did research on this program. They moved from the lowest 10th percentile to the 50th plus. You never get a difference like that without a teacher, because we believed that the parent is the first teacher. The lifelong teacher has an indelible impact on the child. And through that work, I got to know families very well, and I was totally impressed with the power of love and enraged by the injustice of what families have to deal with. Nowhere in my teaching, learning, did I hear anything about domestic violence. Well, let me tell you. Firsthand, because people trust you. So firsthand, I saw enormous domestic violence and child abuse and neglect. And what I realized was that nobody was a monster. and horrible things happened, but it was as if the adults who did terrible things to their partners or to their children, the same thing had happened to them. It was a generational thing, it's a cycle. And particularly in working with teenage moms, some of the mothers were as young as 13. It was definitely a cycle that you could see 3 generations right there of how life had not helped optimal development in any way. And I came to realize that in all that suffering, the common denominator was the absence of empathy. So my belief forever, based on no science, and I mean, it's great to be young, you're so arrogant, right? You think what you think is right, even without proof. I really did, and I wasn't a Pollyanna. I volunteered in prisons and Elizabeth Fry Society, and so I had seen, you know, I'd met murderers. And of course, in the parenting centers, there, you know, had been examples of babies shaken to death and little baby buttocks with a pattern of cigarette butts and, I mean, horrific things. But I realized that the attachment relationship with the parent and the baby, if we're all born with empathy, I really believe that that was where it would flourish or fade. And that what happened in that first year of life was crucial to how that little baby saw and understood their worth, how they felt, were they lovable, did they deserve love? And so that's why I decided to start Roots of Empathy, because I realized on knocking on one of the young mother's doors, she had her fairly newborn little girl in her arms. She hadn't come to the Teen Mom program, the parenting center, and I was worried about her because it was a history of abuse. And she had been abused during the pregnancy. I don't know how she kept that pregnancy. And she had the little toddler, little daughter, on her leg. So when she opened the door to me, she said, "Mayor, he didn't mean it. He said he's sorry." She had a big gash here. She wore glasses, big gash. She clearly punched the glasses into her eyebrow. He even cried. Well, doesn't that make everything okay? So in despair, on the way home, I decided those 2 little girls are going to go up and take that just like they'd seen with Mommy. And I knew the grandma, and she had the same thing. So that's when Roots of Empathy was born, as I had a tearful car ride home, that we have to take the attachment relationship to school. Children have to see what love looks like. If they haven't had the chance, and you know, it was before we really understood about it, was 96. There was not a lot of talk about neuroscience, and it certainly was not on my agenda. But the idea that we know what we experience stays with us, and we remember the feeling of things. And just like we heard earlier how the impact of an empathic teacher stays with us, they're the ones who we remember as our happiest time was when we felt or felt seen or appreciated. So that's what I did, and the woman who was giving me physiotherapy for a wrecked shoulder happened to have had a new baby. So that was it. That poor baby had no choice. After the session, we go down to the 2 worst schools I could find, our lowest performing schools, and you know, making it up as you go. But the tenet of it was that in that relationship comes empathy. And if empathy is the missing thing in violence, we have to find a way to get it into the water supply. And the public school system is the best vehicle for raising up society, the very best vehicle. Families all have different starting points, and there is no point in naming or blaming and shaming. We have to see the family as a solution, not the problem. But the biggest hope is where you get all your children together, where you have one dedicated teacher. The reason Roots of Empathy is in classrooms and not in recreation centers and church groups, etc., is because of the power of the teacher. Now, the classroom teacher gets Roots of Empathy as a gift. We train an instructor from the community, from Bernardo's in this case. They find instructors. And then they're given a curriculum, an award-winning curriculum. And they find a family from the community. And we want a family that is of the community, because a secure attachment relationship, which of course is the best teacher there, has nothing to do with your bank balance. It has to do with how lucky were you and how you were reared, or what has helped you develop a secure attachment relationship capacity with your baby. Even if you didn't have it yourself, there's always intervening things that happened. So the classroom teacher is completely committed to a whole class of children for a lot of hours, for a lot of months, has the background and experience of working with many, many children of the same age. They know what's going on. They have a real sense of what's going on. They can always tell you who's going to be on the front page of the newspaper for a crime. They just have a very good pulse on society. So our idea is to roll out a green blanket and have the little children sit around the green blanket. It's usually the mommy, but very often shared with the dad, depending on what the policy is once you have a baby, the leave for having a baby. And the children are coached to observe what is going on with this little baby who's between 2 and 4 months of age. And I brought the uniform all the babies wear. That's it. That's the first size, 3 to 6 months. So the baby is 2 to 4 months old at the get-go. And the children universally fall in love with the baby. The baby is perfectly, exquisitely vulnerable. Can't walk, can't talk, can't roll over, difficulty holding up their head. So to take the perspective, which is the cognitive aspect of empathy, to be able to take the perspective of a tiny little human being, you completely find the humanity in that baby. And the trick, if you like, in Roots of Empathy is that everything the children learn about that baby and discover how that baby is different from every other baby, how that baby is the same or different from you based on their temperament traits, which are innate, the children come to really develop the cognitive skill of perspective taking. A lot of talk about it. Here's where the wise teacher is able to be with the children and observe everything that's going on. We have some of the most brilliant extensions that teachers dream up for the children they worry about, who show a very good interest in the Roots of Empathy experiential visit. And of course, teachers love that it's experiential. It's a field trip on the green blanket. And then the teaching of the affective aspect of empathy, which is emotion. And we've heard so much about emotion today, and the idea that if children become literate in their emotions, if they know the names of them, they can, a word is a tool for thinking. If you don't have the word, you can't think about it. So with emotional literacy, it's not like the alphabet one, A, B, C, or the 1, 2, 3 in math. It's about you're seeing something, experiencing it, and then learning the word for it, just like we heard so beautifully from you this morning, the bath story, and then you're feeling a bit chilly and you put the left arm in. Now that's a bit better. It's the same idea. It's the children learning the words, the vocabulary for their emotions in the moment where they can relate to it. And then, of course, the trick is, how do you flip everything that has happened on the green blanket to the children's personal experiences? And that's why we have 9 visits over the school year with the family, so the children can track the development of the baby. But the week before and the week after, we have visits where the children learn to predict, and then where they learn to reflect. So we work on the thesis that we only ask experiential questions, so there's not a chance you can be wrong. And just like we heard today, looking at the pictures about various facial expressions, who knows what that person was feeling? Number one, they were acting, but with little babies, we really don't know. Even parents admit they don't know. And we're great actors. We can always mime, you know, how we're feeling. We can trick you. Look at actors. You heard today in the wonderful video how important empathy is for acting, to be able to get under somebody's skin and understand, to walk in their shoes, allows you to have a mindset and an understanding. And I think in this world of increasing complexity and a steady uptick of emotional ineptitude and violence, we really need to develop the capacity to understand the other, to take the Martin Buber I and thou, to be able to find the humanity in the other person. And the way you can do that is by realizing the universal experience is our emotion. And that's what allows us to connect to everybody. And I think the school teachers who host Roots of Empathy so generously, because school teachers are really pressed with trying to get everything in. They have a lot of pressure on delivering all the curriculum and making sure all the children do well. But the short story is, if children develop empathy, if they have the capacity to find their own voice, which is what we look for, to express themselves, because to be emotionally literate, it's not just knowing the word. It's being able to understand yourself and have self-empathy. It's being able to read the cues, the emotional cues of a baby, and then of your friends. It's the idea that you can be conversant with your feelings. And I have to say, we're pretty usually in an emotionally illiterate society. And I'll tell you a quick story about the United Nations. About 8 years ago, I was asked to speak on World Literacy Day, and I thought it was really surprising because I used to be an early literacy specialist, but it was 100 years ago. So after I explained to them, you've got the wrong Mary Gordon, they said, no, we want you to say what you said about emotional literacy. So I went and I did it. I'm sitting side by each on this panel with Barbara Bush, with an amazing audience, everybody, all the countries in their traditional costumes, the most beautiful array of people. And I said to them, as important as it is that schools teach children how to read, if they fail to teach them how to relate, we will have failed societies. Do you know, they all got on their feet. There wasn't a country that did not understand that. So when we talk about relationships, it's kind of like the real estate people. They say location, location, location. I say relationship, relationship, relationship. And I keep finding resonance with all the people who spoke today. People were talking about emotion and talking about relationships and difference. So I think there's incredible connectedness in purpose here. So what I'd like to do is show you a very little clip. It's less than 2 minutes. And the clip is called 18 Questions. And the reason it's called 18 Questions in this short clip is the Roots of Empathy instructor asks 18 questions in a very short period of time. And she was not intentionally doing this. She was being filmed. And you can see it's a school in downtown Toronto. It's one of our lowest performing schools. It's got a very high level of immigrant children who are temporarily poor. But I have to tell you, relational poverty is a worse thing than money poverty. Scarcity of goods or food or anything is fixable. But emotional and relational poverty is dream smashing. And children cannot learn well when they're stressed out or when they're lonely. And the pandemic of loneliness in childhood in the 11 countries we are in, I have to share with you, children are lonely. They're lonely at school. They're lonely after school. And checking in with our children is something that our teachers do brilliantly, as they have a chance to observe them in these programs where the children feel completely comfortable. It's not as if they're getting graded or anything like that. So you can see there's one little fellow in this who was fairly new to English, and he twice offered a comment. And the baby is a very feminine little girl, and he keeps referring to the baby as he. And you'll see how respectfully the Roots of Empathy instructor says she, because we take the approach of intrinsic motivation with the children, that we don't praise them. If you as an adult in the classroom, in a group, not at home, but in a group, if you praise one person, that person feels grand, but everyone else feels a tad nervous, because everyone wants to be appreciated and liked and respected, so it shuts down a lot of children who are not so secure. But in Roots of Empathy, you know, in some places they call it their English as an additional language program, because the children speak up and find voice. And in a democracy, we call Roots of Empathy a participatory democracy, that pluralism should be on our lips, that in order to assert your rights in a respectful way, you have to find your voice. Look at these two young women. Talk about finding their voice and using it constructively to build a civil society. So could I ask you to put on Baby May? So when little Baby May took the second spill, she immediately turned around to her mother. And that's a secure attachment behavior. When you're stressed, do you believe that you will be helped? And pain is stress, and the fright she got in bumping her chin. So she turned around, and her mother, who's a very young mom, patted her chin. So after this, the instructor, Kathy, said to the children, why do you think Baby May turned around to her mommy? And that little boy who was new to English, he said, well, she was asking her mommy if she's okay. How brilliant is that? So, and then Kathy said, so what did her mommy say? And some other child said, you're good to go. So it is true that our best communication is usually not with our words, but the secure attachment and the attunement between the little baby and the parent is what we're hoping the children who haven't had the benefit, through nobody's fault, who didn't land as lucky as Baby May did. Now, Baby May's mother has not a cent to her name, but that woman is rich. That baby is rich and privileged. That relationship will last the whole life for that little baby. So that she believes she's lovable, she believes she's capable, she keeps trying. And the other thing to notice, did you see how serious she was? Oh my golly, she apparently didn't crack a smile for 6 months of coming to, not a smile, nothing. And I'm going to show you another, if you wouldn't mind, thank you. Another video now of Baby May on the very last day. So this is her 9th visit. And of course, her mommy takes her to the school playground because she's a rock star, right? Baby May, in the early months, the children all learn about the various temperament traits, which are innate but can change over time. And it's a way to understand how we're different. Because we can't talk about all the differences. My goodness, you'd be endless what the differences are. And so the children had decided that Baby May's mood was more serious than gregarious. So we don't say positive and negative, a horrible thing to be saying about any person that they've got a negative mood, or the glass half empty. I don't like that much either. So, but over time, she was slow to warm up. And they came to appreciate that. But by the last class, she felt she knew them all. Did you notice she didn't go to the one little boy? Because he had frightened her once. And you know how you do like peekaboo? He was a bit exuberant. And she didn't forget. Just like babies, there's a lot of research to show that babies will not go to or give treats to anyone who they perceive as being mean to others or to a puppet or to whatever. So there's an incredible brilliance in babies. And Baby May she did her first crawl with those children. They went mad. The cheering you could hear down the hall, apparently, frightened her, unfortunately. But I just want to share a story or two with you about the milestones that the babies go through. The children learn about the milestones. And why? Because then they can learn about their own milestones. And they can not just learn about their own emotions and learn to regulate their emotions, which is crucial. And that's what our research shows, a very strong degree of the children learning to regulate their emotions, which you can't regulate unless you know what they are. But quite typically, the babies save up their big moment, their first steps, their crawling, particularly the flipping over. You know, going from that beached whale stage to being able to flip over. But when they start crawling, and sometimes it happens at home, and it's always a very big surprise for the children. So in the one case that I just heard about in Vancouver, where I was just recently, a little boy came in from foster care, and I mean, that's part of the reason I'm doing this as well, for those children. But a little fellow came in from foster care. It was a grade 3 classroom, so he would have been 8 years old. And he came in March, so the program had started in the fall. And the teacher said to the Roots of Empathy instructor, "Now I apologize in advance. We have one very unruly little boy who's having an adjustment problem. He's been in many, many foster care situations. He's got an aggression problem." So she said, "Do you want to cancel the class?" Absolutely not. So we just make sure we have the little child sit next to the instructor, even maybe between the baby and the instructor. And the baby's obviously in the parents' arms. So anyhow, the mother said there's a big surprise for the children. Yesterday, the baby started to crawl, not a lot, but started to crawl. So during the Roots of Empathy class, the mom put the baby down and said to the children, "Just watch." And the baby started to crawl, and the children were wildly excited, so the baby stopped, a little bit alarmed, and then they quietened down, and then the baby started to crawl again. And everybody is wishing, will the baby crawl to me? Will the baby crawl to me? Who did the baby crawl to? That little boy. So there is something, we don't know what it is. But when you can't communicate with words, we know that other ways of communicating are heightened. And in the Roots of Empathy class, that little fellow had experienced what, you know, the singing around, "Goodbye, baby May, see you soon." We do that at the beginning too. It's because you build solidarity when you sing together. We sit in a circle, it's not an accident. We're sitting in a circle so we can see one another, appreciate one another. The other thing is, when you come from a position of intrinsic motivation, children are not trying to impress anyone. What's the point? You don't get any kudos for it anyway. And we never ask the first hand that goes up. We do it like the radio shows, the seventh caller. So children are not rewarded for getting their brain and their mouth in gear. They're not rewarded at all. We've taken all the authority away from the adult. The decision we want them to make is that what they think about themselves, about what they think, we talk about metacognition, that's the most important decision. We're not going to be there next year in your life, but you're going to be there every year in your life, so you better think about what you think and respect yourself for what you think and respect the other children and don't be interrupting. How would you feel if they were interrupted? So the brilliant thing that happens, the babies, I had another situation, I was in Manitoba where we have one of the big, long, randomized, longitudinal studies that shows that aggression goes down when the empathy goes up. Aggression stays down, empathy stays up, basically. And this little fellow had his hands in his pocket, and the mother had already announced that the baby has just learned to crawl. So the baby, when the baby's passed around, the mom has the baby, and the children are allowed to touch the baby's legs, whatever the mother says. It's usually just the baby's legs or feet because of germs. Even though the children wash their hands, you know, the allergic salute, there's no guarantees. So anyway, this little boy, I noticed, everyone was touching the baby's legs. This little boy hadn't. And then where they're sitting down, he has his hands in his pocket. And so the mother put the baby down, and everyone, oh, we're waiting and waiting and waiting to see what the baby would do. He went to the little boy with his hands in his pocket. And the baby put his hands on the little fellow's knees. The little boy is 10. And looked up to him, and everybody, the children said, aw. Some were saying, aw, isn't that great? He went to my friend. And some were saying, aw, he didn't go to me, depending. So the little boy didn't take his hands out of his pocket to lift him up. And the baby was asking. So eventually, it seemed a long time, he took his hands out of his pocket, and God love it. The fingers were badly deformed, co-joined and going in the wrong direction. And he had felt self-conscious about his hands. And the whole class clapped. So the solidarity piece, the fact that the classroom can be sacred territory, wonderful things can happen in the classroom. And if children love one another, like they love the baby, if they love themselves, if they forgive one another, you know, it can make learning glorious. And in fact, if children are stressed, there's no learning happening, period, particularly if there's toxic stress. So this whole idea of learning to relate to a little baby so that you can relate to yourself and to one another. The theory of change in Roots of Empathy is that when children are guided in observing how a baby feels and what a baby's intention is, like their perspective, they become very skilled at that. They develop emotional literacy and perspective-taking skills. And those things allow them to improve the relationships they have with other people. And then that's the short-term goal, is a reduction of aggression, including bullying, and improvement of pro-social behavior. But the long-term goal is that they will grow up to be adults who will be responsible citizens. And adults, if they have children, who will be responsive parents, who will be able to be attuned to their little baby to understand what their baby needs. We never know really why a baby cries, but to be able to connect to the discomfort for the baby. And that's how it works, thank you. So the whole business of intrinsic pride is another part of Roots of Empathy. And that's an interesting dynamic in Ireland, in that very often I've been told from our people, our Roots of Empathy people, that it's not so good to be very proud. And that's how I grew up. In a convent school, you weren't allowed to be proud. That was seemed like vain or something. So we're very big on pride. But it's pride of, and could you put on the slide for a minute, just so I can show folk? It's not pride of being the fastest or the smartest or the first or any of those things. It's pride for family achievements. It's pride for your ability, and we go right through them because I'm very close on time. Thanks so much. That's the little boy 4 years later. I'm going to go quickly through this. 4 years, they're Roots of Empathy babies. 4 years later, you can do anything, you know, when you're 4. Here the idea is that children are able to take the perspective of the baby to understand why they would cry. And the metaphor for the home is a door and the mother gone. How brilliant that that child could understand that. So if we want children to grow up to understand the people on the other side of the mountain are the same as you, they feel the same as you, we can have an inclusive world. Here's the domestic violence. That little boy understands the power dynamic. Try not to get mad at a baby because they might learn to be mean. That's the intergenerational cycle of violence and poor parenting. He's 10. They're chasing me, I told them to stop. That's the horror of a child relived, the helplessness. Here you go. I felt proud when I fed my mom when she came back from Coxwell Hospital. So the child is proud that she was able to help. That is far better than initially what the children tell us in Canada anyway. They're proud that they scored a goal in hockey, or are they proud that they're the best at math? Not that they're good at math, but they're the best. So here, this one again, I'm proud when my grandma got her hip operation because she faced her fears. Now, how altruistic and empathic is that? You cannot get to altruism. I mean, you can't get to altruism in society unless you have empathy. So if little children growing up are able to downregulate their own emotions, to be able to understand what it is to feel with another person, if they're able to believe that they are part of a human family, we have hope for the future. So, I'm going backwards. I'm going to finish with this one so we can have some questions. This is my personal hero, Ricky. He's 6 years old. So they had a new slide in the playground. It was a very long slide. It was September, first month of school. And Ricky had just started his Roots of Empathy class. And in Roots of Empathy, the children learn that we are all big babies. Just like they understand the baby and they would be horrified if anyone would ever hurt the baby's feelings, let alone slap them or something. Then they realize, well, aren't we all just big Roots of Empathy babies? So they think about one another in a different way. So the slide was higher than this little fellow had been on. And he got up to the top and had a panic attack. And you can appreciate the lineup of children on the ladder and the children on the bottom throwing pebbles up. Everyone's saying, you wimp, you coward, come on down. They want their turn, recess is short. So little Ricky said to the children on the ladder, all 6 years of age of him, come down, I'm going up to help my friend. And you know the moral authority of justice and righteousness? They all came down. He went up and he put his legs around his friend and he said, we'll go down together. So I think we all learned a lesson from little Ricky. In a classroom, a little girl was being mocked. She was a child who was living in a foster care home. She was being mocked because she had babyish, geeky shoes on. She had the department store shoes on, not the special model with the wheels and the lights and all of that. And one of the little girls in her class, when she saw that happening before school, when recess time came, she said to her friend, can I wear one of your shoes? Now that's a 6-year-old child and an 8-year-old child. We have hope. So let me stop, and any comments or questions you have. Thank you.